the scary thing about this problem is that it's not an accident, right? This social media and technology was designed this way on purpose by tech companies, right? It's been designed to get you hooked by hijacking the reward system and the dopamine system that Chris was talking about, right? So the question you guys must be wondering is why? Why do they do this, right? So very simply, to understand the answer to this question, we need to understand what's known as the attention economy. Right now, if you take any company, right, whether it's a biscuit company or Facebook, there are three elements that are really important to any company, right? The first are the resources that a company needs, right? Like the raw materials and things like that, right? So if it's a biscuit company, let's say we're talking about Munchie, right? Actually, before we take some examples, the second thing that's important is the product itself, and finally, the customers, right? So if you take this Munchie example, the biscuit example, we're talking about the resources. These are raw materials like the flour, the sugar, also like the people who make the biscuits, right? So the labor, and obviously the product are the biscuits, right? And the customers are everyday regular people, right? So these are the important elements when it comes to any company. So the thing is, if you take a typical social media company, right, what you see on the screen is how most people think it works, right? So the resources for, let's say, Instagram or Facebook, everyone assumes that these are the engineers who put in, development time to maintain the apps, the electricity that Facebook and Instagram has to spend to build these apps, things like that, right? And most of you think that the product is the app, right, which provides you with services like connecting with friends, sharing pictures. That's a product, that's a service, right? And following that, we all think that the customers here are regular people like us who use this app. But the problem here, the truth is, we don't pay for this, right? These apps are completely free for us, right? So are we really the customers here? If you really think about it, the truth is, the real customers who actually pay for something when it comes to these companies are advertising companies, right? So the real customers for Facebook and Instagram are not regular people like you or I. The actual customers who pay Mark Zuckerberg money are advertising companies, right? So the real product here is not the social media app itself. The real product here, the actual product, is you and your data, right? Because this is what they're selling to these companies, right? And the raw material here, right, the resources that they use to actually build this product, right, this data, is your attention, right? So although we assume that the actual product when it comes to Facebook and Instagram is the app, and the regular customers of these companies are you and I, this is not the case, right? They actually make money using your data, your attention, and selling it to advertising companies, right? So you're not in this equation at all, other than as a raw material, right? Your attention is the raw material, your data is the product that they're selling, right? So that's how they make money, and we all need to understand this, right? So the thing is, we also need to understand that this attention, this raw material, this resource is very, very, very limited, right? And just to show you guys how limited it is, right, I'm going to show you a small video, and there's going to be a small challenge here, right? What I want you guys to do is, there'll be two teams in this video, right? There'll be a team with white t-shirts and a team with black t-shirts, right? And they will be passing around two basketballs. Okay, so your challenge is to count how many times the team with white t-shirts pass the ball to each other, right? So I want you guys to watch this video and just focus on the white team who's passing the ball, and count how many times the ball is being passed around. Okay, so I'm going to play this video.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Okay, so can I have some answers? How many times did you see the white team pass the basketball? Answers?
I think I saw 14.
14, okay. 13.
7.
What else?
13.
7.
I saw
30,
16.
16. Okay, so the correct answer, I'm going to play the video, right?
many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes.
So here's the
But did you
twist,
see the
right? You guys
gorilla?
counted, but did you guys see the gorilla? How many of you guys saw the gorilla? Nope. Okay, so watch this video again, okay?
Free only.
You guys see the gorilla walking into the screen?
It was lagging, I think that's why they would have seen. They would have, when it
Yeah.
paused, they would have seen this.
This
Right.
video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris.
Okay, so this just shows you how limited our attention is, right? So if you're focusing on one thing, it's really difficult to focus on anything else, right? You miss out on so much. Okay, so now imagine.
It is available
sorry.
for use in talks, training, and
Give me a second.
This
Let
is
me
a
go to the next slide. Okay, so now imagine if you were a biscuit company, right? And the raw, the resources, right? The flour and the sugar is very, very rare, just like your attention, right? It is very, very limited. Think about the competition between the biscuit companies, right? Between Munchie and Maliban, just to buy and use that flour, right? And sugar. So we kind of have the same problem here, right? Because your attention, which is the resources for these tech companies, are very, very limited. And you guys saw that yourselves right now, right? So that's why we call it the attention economy, right? Because it's based on this limited resource of attention. So there's a real competition between these tech companies to grab your attention and keep you addicted to their platform, right? So Facebook is trying to outdo Twitter. Twitter is trying to outdo TikTok, right? So it's this massive competition for this very limited resource, right? So how do they exactly do this? So there are 5 main techniques that these tech companies use to try to get us addicted, right? So the first is social validation. Second is what we call Fomo. Third, variable ratio schedule. 3, gamification. 4, gamification, and number 5, learning algorithms, right? So all these sound really complicated, but don't worry, I'll be going into each of these in detail and explaining them, right? Now, all of these 5 things, these techniques are meant to hijack our dopamine system and our reward system that Chris was talking about, right? So these companies spend a lot of money thinking of ways to use these 5 techniques to get you addicted. They hire experts who build casinos, people who are experts in artificial intelligence, scientists, psychologists, right? Just so that they can beat the competition, right? And keep you addicted and get your attention, right? And the reason we know this is because there's been a lot of designers recently who've been in these companies, who've been coming out and who've been starting to speak out and tell us what how these companies actually function, right? So now let's basically look at these techniques one by one and try to understand them, right? So first is social validation, right? Now, social media companies understand that deep down, everyone wants or like needs to be liked, right? This is like a psychological truth about all of us, right? This is why every platform that we know about has some form of likes, some sort of heart reaction, sharing, and commenting options, right? Because every time we get some sort of like, we get that small hit of dopamine, right? There is nothing, and here I would want to stress, like, there's nothing really wrong with wanting to be liked, right? Because it's what's built into us, right? But usually this really needs work, right? We need to work on ourselves to gain that kind of social value, right? But these companies, because they're competing for your attention, make it so easy by kind of using this fact to hijack our dopamine system, right? You hardly need any work to get any likes. You show a little bit of skin and boom, you have like so many likes, right? And that warps a lot of things, right? Because this makes this dopamine hit very easy to get, and this causes us to get addicted, as Chris pointed out, right? So whenever I post a picture on Instagram, for example, I really struggle, like I keep checking how many likes I get and things like that, right? Which has made me like recently just post less, because the moment I post even a single picture, I want to see how many likes I get, right? So this social validation is something that these tech companies use to hijack our attention. Okay, so the next is this idea of FOMO, right? So that feeling when, if you don't check your messages or you don't check your notifications or Instagram or Snapchat, you feel like you're missing out on something, right? And this feeling is called FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. And it's another technique that these companies use to get us addicted, right? Because they know that we have this fear of missing out on things, right? this is why all these platforms have built-in notifications, right? Sounds, bells, right? It makes you feel this FOMO, right? Even these friend requests that pop up and we get an email about it, we get messages about it, right? They're constantly fearing missing out on something. And these tech companies use this feeling to get you guys addicted. Okay, now we come to this idea of variable ratio schedule. Now, this sounds like a complicated phrase, so let's break it down with a simple example, right? So let's say you have a chocolate machine, right? You pull this lever on this chocolate machine, and out from this little tap, you'll either get a piece of chocolate or some caravilla, right? You don't know. Okay, so every time you pull this, right, you either get a chocolate or you'll get some caravilla, right? So I hope all of you still like eat caravilla, but obviously the better choice is a chocolate. But strangely, this unpredictability, right, not knowing what's going to pop up, whether it's a caravilla or a chocolate, gets humans easily hooked, right? So this is the same principle you see in casinos and slot machines, right? You pull that, you know, that small lever, and you don't know whether you're going to get a reward or whether you're going to be given a caravilla, right? And that's a very strong impulse to get people addicted, right? And that's what we call variable ratio schedule. And this is built into social media platforms, right? For example, you have this thing called pull to refresh, right? Where you pull and you drag and you see this nice loading icon. It's kind of like pulling that lever, right? And you don't know whether the post you'll see will be a reward or whether it'll be something that you're really not interested in, right? And it's that anticipation and unpredictability that gets you hooked, right? So sometimes you see this loading screen in Facebook, in Twitter, and things like that, right? And we think it's because, you know, your internet is not very fast or whatever, but go to some place with good internet and you still see this kind of loading icon, right? That's because they're creating this kind of lever, unpredictability effect, right? And the same with things like the infinite scroll. You're scrolling, you're not sure, you know, what you will see next, and you want to see what's next, right? Auto playing videos on Instagram and TikTok, right? These videos just keep playing, and you want to see what's next, right? Because who knows, it could be something really interesting, right? So since we can't predict what's going to happen next, it's going to get us hooked. And this specifically goes to Nishan. It's the same thing with Tinder as well, Nishan, right? Because you're swiping, right? And you're taking a gamble. You're not sure whether the next person is going to be someone you like, whether you're going to swipe right or swipe left, right? So it's the same principle. And you see this used in a lot of social media platforms. Then is this idea of gamification, right? So this basically involves including gaming elements into these apps, right? So things like competitiveness, rewards. And when I say rewards, again, it's dopamine, right? The reward you're feeling, right? So it gives you these bragging rights and a small hit of dopamine. So for example, you have things like Snapchat streaks, which ultimately mean nothing, right, in terms of anything tangible, but it makes us feel, you know, like we've achieved something. You have this Snapchat streak with a friend, you know, the number of likes, the number of subscribers, the number of followers you have, right? So you have these gamification elements, competitiveness and reward built into this system. And then finally, these things called learning algorithms, right? So some people call this like artificial intelligence or AI, right? But it's not like the AI we think of when we watch movies. The technical term for this is actually called deep learning. It's not a human level kind of intelligence that we have. It's just this technique that makes computers really, really good at doing one specific thing, right? So for example, like playing chess, right? So a quick story. In 1997, a computer algorithm called Deep Blue from IBM beat the world chess champion at the time, Garry Kasparov, right? Now, did this not because it was smarter, it did it by complete brute force, right? It didn't technically use the deep learning thing I was telling you about, but it just could process most of the possible moves on the chessboard better than a human, right? It could think of all the possible moves better than a human and choose which one to go, right? And that's pretty scary if you think about it, right? A computer can think of so many moves ahead of you, right? But if you think that's scary, this was back in 1997, right? Exactly 20 years later, in 2017, we have in like modern times, we have something called AlphaZero. This is Google's AlphaZero, and this is based on this deep learning technique, not like Deep Blue, right? Deep Blue was just based on like brute force, but Google's AlphaZero is based on, you can see how scary it looks, right? It's based on this deep learning technique, which basically what it does is how it works is you show it example after example after example, and it watches and it learns, right? So in 2017, AlphaZero, built by Google, after just 4 hours of learning, right? You just show it videos of chess games, right? So after 4 hours of learning and watching tens of thousands of games, it could beat the most sophisticated chess players at an inhuman level, right? Like it never loses, right? It leaves even like computers like Deep Blue in the dust, right? With just 4 hours of learning, right? So that's how powerful these deep learning AI techniques are, right? So if you have an algorithm that can beat the world chess champion in 1997, right, and then learning algorithms in 2017 that can do even better than that, right, with just 4 hours of training or learning, think of the algorithms we're up against, right? Because these are built by Google, Facebook, and companies like that, right? Where, you know, we are feeding millions and millions of data and examples every hour, right, of every day from around the world to these massive machines, these AI intelligent algorithms, right? So we're teaching these systems exactly what to show us to keep us glued to our screens, right? We are showing them what we like. We're giving what gives us dopamine, basically, right? So they get really, really, really good at showing us exactly what we need to see to keep us glued to our screens. So our brains, like if a chess champion can't compete, you know, our brains can't compete against these systems, right? And that's why you're addicted, right? So it's not entirely your fault, right? You're up against these massive, these algorithms, right? And with everything else I talked about, you take these, you put in the scroll, Fomo, variable ratio scheduling, all the things I talk about, you realize how exactly, like how big this problem is, right? So to wrap things up, I just want to remind you guys that all you have really is your attention, your focus, right? It's very, very limited, right? Remember the gorilla test, right? Focusing on the balls being passed around made you lose track of the gorilla, right? And you need to ask yourself, how many gorillas do you have in your life, right? We have, you know, our studies, we have our friends and family, we have our health to think about, we have fun, you know, we have our hobbies, right? And the time we choose to focus on any one of these things is very limited, right? And life is very, very, very short, right? So all of us, we need to ask ourselves and evaluate how much time and attention we want to spend being, you know, these slaves to these tech companies. Now, there are good things about some of these technology too, right? And these apps, right? So it's up to you to balance all this. Okay, and that's what Piyumi is going to focus on in the next presentation. Like, how do you deal with this problem and balance everything out?